Total Spotlight series talking about CMMC basics for MSPs. We're gonna let people file into the room here a little bit. We got quite a bunch of people interested in this. So Brian and I are super excited to talk with you all today. All right, Brian, we'll give them a couple minutes. Hope everyone's having a good morning so far.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Ready?
Glad everyone made it this morning. And like Andrew said, we'll let some folks sort of get into the room here.
Yeah,
There was a lot of interest, so we're excited that folks are curious about this topic and that you're here to learn a little bit about it.
excellent. Okay. All right. Well, you know what? We're going to rock and roll. We're going to get started. I think we got a great discussion here today. I'm really excited about it. So, yeah, as I said, we're going to be talking about CMMC basics. And so making sure everyone's familiar with actually what we're here for, right, series. It is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification for DoD contractors. Basically, what is the realm that we as MSPs, and those supporting that community need to be kind of thinking about. Where do we need to go with this? So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it, take a look at our agenda. So I am Andrew Scott. I am one of our security solutions advisors here at Todyl. Very happy to be speaking with you all. I work with quite a few partners of ours as well, and I'm joined by Brian Gunther. Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Glad you can join us today. My name is Brian Gunther. I'm the founder and president of Exceed Cybersecurity and Compliance. We help companies that are working with the defense industrial base or with MSPs better understand what CMMC is about and helping them through the journey. That's what we focus on.
Absolutely. So here's our agenda today. Again, we're just really trying to frame up and understand, what is CMMC? How does this apply? Where is this, kind of what are the basics we need to understand? Is dispelling some of those, maybe initial notions or assumptions folks may have? And ultimately, okay, what is it that the MSP community needs to be thinking about? So our agenda today, we're going to talk about it, basics. What is it? Where does it apply? We're going to take a look at kind of where it's come from, right? What is that history of CMMC and kind of the way that the DoD has worked with the private sector and the various components of its supply chain. CMMC 2.0, obviously big part of the news, kind of a lot that everyone's on their tiptoes kind of waiting for, but what is it that we know about right now? What is this actually requiring? And then what are those impacts on the DoD contractors and then the MSPs? And we'll open up to Q&A at the end. So moving forward, so I feel it's important, Brian. We want to, kind of what is CMMC and where does it start? So I think if we think about it, the defense industrial base, the defense supply chain is so massive, right? Think about kind of everything that's included in there. How would you define what the defense industrial base and defense supply chain is? What are the organizations that are making up this community?
Sure. Foundationally, it's really good to know and understand, right? It's important to understand the defense industrial base, or as you said, the defense supply chain, often terms used interchangeably, are effectively those organizations, businesses, companies in the US that in some way sell a product or a service to the US, to the federal government, right? In this case, we're talking about the DoD, hence the defense industrial base. And I want to clarify something. It's really important to understand is that it could be any type of business, right? It could be a manufacturer creating like widgets or nuts and bolts for an F-16 or for a Joint Strike Fighter. It could be somebody that's selling kitchen equipment, right, to an army base somewhere in who knows where, right? It could be any product or service you could think of, because really the reality is the DoD buys pretty much everything that is manufactured or sold, right? And so that is a massive supply chain that the DoD cares about. And that's really high level what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the kind of different types of services that, the DoD is purchasing. I mean, it can be everything from, manufacturers to service providers to construction companies to healthcare organizations to universities who are doing R&D work. Kind of again, right, being mindful of everything that if you're an MSP, you're on the line, you're maybe, kind of thinking, well, who in my, community and my customer base is part of that? Being mindful that there's a lot of different organizations that will fall under this, but not all organizations are the same in terms of importance. And as awkward as it can be to kind of accept that, let's talk a little bit about the different maturity levels 1 and 2, right? And maybe where some of these orgs may fall, or what are those distinctions you think, Brian, or you're seeing in terms of what is the maturity level one versus maturity level two, kind of a high level? And how would maybe, how would those orgs of different, services differentiate or fall into those different categories, if that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to explain that. And so there's a lot of confusion, I think, around these descriptions. Who has what? I'm ML1, I'm ML2, and I'll give you the definition in a second here, so don't worry. Where maybe MSPs are even what are called organizations seeking certification or organizations seeking assessment. In other words, the defense contractor or subcontractor, they seem to think they know what it is. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later about how the contract itself really dictates what you are, right? And what your contractual requirements are. But in a nutshell, FCI and COI, ML1, ML2 are all interconnected. And I'll kind of explain this. We have a graphic a little later on the slideshow where you show how this all works together. ML1 stands for maturity level one. So in short, what that means is that the defense contractor must adhere to and show or self-attest for 17 security practices, right? They may not be technical in nature, but there's certain practices they have to employ and have to attest to the DoD that they completed in order to showing that they're safeguarding what's called federal contract information, FCI. That is akin to ML1, maturity level one. Now, if we're talking about maturity level two, right? That is far greater. Now, you think that 17 is quite a bit. Well, I hope you're sitting down, hold on to your hat, because maturity level two is 110 controls, which is actually the exact same thing as NIST 800 171, Special Publication 171. And that has 110 controls or practices, right? Around 70 different domains. And that is a lot, right? If you think about it, that's a tremendous lift, especially for an organization, defense contractor that may have never dealt with this before. So I'm like, where did this come from? We'll talk about more about the origins in a minute. But effectively, what that means is that they must comply and attest or even certify by a third party that they have done these things in order to be in compliance with their federal contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, kind of you mentioned 800 171, and that really, for folks maybe on the line who may not be, aware or whatever, but this is the security program framework for protecting that controlled and classified information, right? So how do you see, right, the difference between and the, kind of the connection between 171 and where the CMMC final rule is, defining how that needs to be leveraged and protected and utilized.
Sure, and thank you for going through the acronym soup, right? The DoD is sadly is known for this. They have their own language almost, right? It's like secret handshakes and stuff. It's kind of crazy, and they have their own acronyms, right? They're a acronym soup. But anyway, CUI, as you said, controlled unclassified information. To be clear, this is information that may reside on non-federal systems. So, for example, a defense contractor on their own internal infrastructure and their information systems, right? So how does NIST 800-171 versus CMMC final rule? What does that mean, right? So 800-171 has been around for quite some time. That's now in a revision 3. To be clear, this is referring to Rev 2, not Rev 3, okay? Because Rev 3 did make some changes, some consolidation around those controls. But how are they different from one another? Well, it's very simple. This 800-171 had been in place. We'll talk a bit more about this later for quite some time. And what the final rule means is that you as an organization must either, again, the defense contractor must either self-attest if they're maturity level 1, in some cases lower level maturity level 2, or be certified by what's called a C3PAO. And no, that's not R2D2's friend. It's a certified third-party assessment organization. They have to show and prove they've been certified. So in other words, that they did what they said they would do. It has to be proven. And that's where the final rule comes in. It's very important to understand CMMC is really just sort of buttoning up that loophole that existed for a long time because defense contractors didn't do the things they're supposed to do a while back, but more about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of if we think about where this apply, you mentioned contracts and really, being mindful of what is that contract and the specific requirements and the service and the program, really, what is it that DoD has bought from that end use organization? Kind of I think it's important to dive into really how to understand what's in that contract a little bit more, right, Brian? At least at a starting point. So understanding what those contracts mean, really what are a lot of, some of the high level obligations I think that these orgs are really being expected to that may be in a contract. Talk to us a little bit about kind of what you've seen within that realm.
Sure. Yeah, so I want to start off with I'm not a contract specialist. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a GovCon attorney. It's not what I do. I know a lot of GovCon attorneys. So if you need someone, reach out. I can help you connect with someone. So federal contracts, in this case, contracts based around, there are two terms you need to know. One is called the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That is a regulation that Congress put in place a long time ago, which dictates how the federal government buys products and services through its supply chain. Okay. Then the Defense Department says, well, we're going to have our own flavor, right? We're going to mix it up a little bit, right? And make it a little fun. We're going to call it the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, and they call it the supplement, DFARS, FARS. So those DFARS regulation are somewhat unique in the way they approach it, because think about what the DoD does, right? They're all about national security, protecting our national interests. And, those contracts can get pretty deep as far as what they go over, what they cover, what the contractor is agreeing to do. Okay. And here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes these regulations or these clauses, for example, DFARS 7012, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but these can be hidden ostensibly or seemingly hidden or included by reference, where it's just reference like a quick line. By the way, all that applies to you, the contractor, right? So it gets really tricky and kind of hard to understand that, right? And so what happens is a lot of contracting firms, they have agreed to all these terms and clauses that they don't understand. And that's really what the DoD has seen. And that's why the CMMC process came about, because they found that the information, the CUI, just wasn't being safeguarded.
100%. And so speaking of safeguards, one thing that I think is really important also for folks on the line here to be, mindful of, right? But I think is one of the challenge that these contractors are facing is the need for a more robust security program to protect whatever, the information, if it's FCI or CUI, right? What they're doing versus simply, hey, yeah, I've deployed some tools and technology and I'm good to go. So, I see this, quite often, but this is a challenge, I think, that many orgs and for the MSPs on the line, being mindful of, kind of the differences in delivering a tools and tech service versus really needing to provide a security program for those organizations and how you do that, right? So, Brian, I'd love to, get your thoughts about the differences here on a security program versus tools and tech. And what does that mean when the government's asking for those safeguards and really authorize that, yes, we are protecting this information, and how is that done?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Again, that's kind of the heart of the matter, right? It's what we're talking about here. So a lot of us here have historically been, I mean, look, we've been in the MSP or MSSP space and for quite some time. Some of us are kind of moving more into the MSSP space. Clearly, if you're a total partner, which you all are since you're here, you have already embraced the fact that security matters. It does make a difference and it makes you stand out from other companies out there in the marketplace, right? So let's just, first of all, recognize that that's the case and that you've taken that step to securitize your practice and your customers. Okay. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that. It's no longer just acceptable to have a firewall, an AV, right? Or EDR, whatever you want to call it. It just doesn't work. And the reason why that is because there's no assurance or there's no process or framework around how the data, again, CUI controlled unclassified information, the government, in this case, the DoD, wants you to safeguard on your, again, the contractor's systems. And there's a variety of different frameworks. If you think of like CIS, Center for Internet Security version 8.8.0 or 8.1, which is a recent iteration, NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, those are all kind of openly adopted and understood frameworks. ISO 27001, building an information security management system, all of those are frameworks that are either nationally or globally acceptable as far as implementing a security plan. And that's a great start, but that's not what the DoD wants. They want something very specific. Right. And that's NIST 800-171. And some of those controls, if you look at the details, it reads in sort of an awkward way because they don't want to give you the name of a product and they describe things in a weird way too. Right. It's kind of odd. It's like the way that that's worded. And you're like, what does this mean? You have to sort of figure that out. Right. It's almost like a little guessing game. But ultimately, like, oh, the way this is described, oh, they're talking about EDR. Okay, cool. Oh, I think they're talking about MFA. Right. And implementing the security program, and we can actually implement, first of all, identify what's in place, right? It always starts with an asset inventory, right? And sort of figure out what's even there, what systems exist begins there. And you got to create policies, right? And the policies, and I don't mean to go on too long here, but policies are the law, right? It's the law by which the organization conducts itself, then building out processes, and then building out technical controls, and then making sure that the customer themselves, because they have responsibility here too. Not everything is technical. Some are people related, some are physical control related, right? Safeguarding the environment, access control, cameras, these all come together. That is a real security program, right? And you have to be able to show that. And it's not just tools and tech. Put in, EDR, SASE, you're this, boom, and you're done. I'm covered. Nope. Sorry, it's not that easy. So I
Yeah.
don't want to go too deep in that, but I'll stop there.
No, no, I appreciate that context and your comments there. I think it's really important also, right? You hit on a couple of words I'm very passionate about. Well, process, right? People process technology, but for the security program, right? Being mindful of how you're going to continuously assess, leverage, and protect the environment, the information system, everything there in the environment. So really focusing on those operations, the processes, really how are we continuously assessing and evaluating what's happening in the environment, the risk, what's coming and going, kind of those connections that really becomes more of an operations component. But that is a key part of a security program is being able to continuously leverage and adopt those tools in line with your people to assess the risk and the posture of the environment and adapt to its changes. So,
And
for those
maintain it,
on,
by the way, and
go
maintain
ahead.
it. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. And maintain it going forward.
100%,
Continuous
100%.
assessment. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, really process, I think, is a key part of this too, and being mindful for those in the line. How are we really continually assessing the way that we're using our tools, our internal processes, the way we're assessing risk, right? What are those crown jewels and how are we reviewing and understanding how they're protected, what the activity is, and then refining our approach. That's that security program, I think is important on folks. So, I think let's maybe take a step back here real quick, Brian, right? We kind of talking about kind of where it's going. Let's talk about where it's been.
Yeah.
So DoD compliance and data protection with the DoD's work in the private sector has come a long way over time, as you had mentioned. And so,
Mhm.
I think it's valuable to look backwards and let's get a kind of quick history of CMMC. So where has this come from?
Yeah.
Why now? But not necessarily why now. Why has this become such a thing, as you mentioned?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, the history I think is important, right? To kind of because for some people, to just hit some smack in the face or like, oh my God, they just maybe heard about it a few months ago, maybe a year ago, but there's a long history, and hence the timeline here. So, of course, after the attacks of 9/11, the U.S. Congress commissioned a full 9/11 Commission report came out in the summer of 2004, and that identified that there were a lot of security lapses and information sharing that didn't happen between agencies that actually made 9/11 potentially far worse or potentially could have been avoided, right? If that information sharing had happened. And that was really the origin of where this all started with that 9/11 Commission report. So fast forward to a couple years later, right, 2005, 2009, this is actually a major milestone, which is where the NIST SP 853, for those of you who are like, whose eyes are rolling in the back of their head with all the numbers and acronyms, effectively, that is this massive control framework, right? Cybersecurity framework around how to protect federal systems, not non-federal systems, but actual federal government systems and the data housed on those. We're talking about over 900 controls. It is gargantuan, right? And at the same time, they developed a smaller piece of that. They kind of parsed off this NIST 800-171, which is, hey, how do our defense contractors protect the data we care about on non-federal systems, on their own infrastructure, right? That's what they developed around the same time. But that was the birth of it, right? It wasn't really, not much was really being done with it, other than 853 being pushed out to the federal government across those different departments and agencies. Okay. And so in 2010, executive order was signed that identified that identified CUI, controlled unclassified information, and that really needs to be safeguarded across all agencies. So that was a presidential executive order. So now, fast forward, this is where the meat and potatoes come in. This is where it gets really interesting. All right. So 2016-17 is when we're in the finalization and mandate of DFAR 7012. Now, what does that mean? Remember, we talked about that acronym before, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's how the Defense Department buys products and services from its supply chain. That's what DFAR stands for. 7012 is a concatenation, a shortening of 252204712, which means very basically that you as a government contractor, defense contractor, will implement NIST 800-171 and all of its controls. Okay. They started baking that into contracts starting in 2017, and it's been in contracts ever since. Okay. So I want you just to think about that for a second, because this is actually important enough to pause there. This is when the DoD said defense contractors that have to protect CUI, to be clear, right? The ML2 level, akin to maturity level 2 today, they need to start safeguarding this controlled unclassified information, starting way back then. However, there was no enforcement, right? And so going forward in 2018 and then 2019, 2020, 2021, in that 3-year time frame, what the DoD realized, because they did spot checks on these defense contractors, like, holy crap, nobody's doing this, right? These contractors are not implementing NIST 800-171 and all the controls related to that. So they said, we kind of screwed up here, right? What CMMC really is, and you need to understand this, is it's really saying you did the things you're supposed to do. That's really what that is. So frankly, for anybody who read their contracts and understood them, shouldn't be a surprise. So moving forward to 2024, as this has been rolled out, and of course, CMMC is twisted and turned all over, sort of flapped in the breeze. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen. Lots of assumptions. Andrew, you've seen it, right?
Yep.
It's been kind of crazy, right? And that's not going to happen. Well, guess what? It's here.
Yep.
And the final component of CMMC, what's called Title 32, CFR Title 32, has now gotten final authorization from what's called OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulation Affairs. And that was done quicker than expected. And now they're looking at December 2024, CMMC being official and in regulation and done.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it being included in contracts starting in 2025 in what's called Title 48. Title 48 means it can be baked into contracts, and that's another piece. That part requires congressional approval.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Title 32 does as well. But that's again, a few minute explanation, but now you know the timeline of where this started, that there's actually a method to the madness.
Right. I really appreciate that overview. I think it's important for folks, right? A couple of key things, I think, big takeaways in my mind here, based upon what you kind of just outlined, is one, obviously, this is nothing new, right? This has been coming for quite some time. However, it's not going to go backwards. So you see that point there that we have at 2025, raw and auditing, and Brian, you mentioned it's possibly coming here, most likely December 2024, right? The government may start be putting teeth and the requirements and really starting to monitor and audit this a little closer, right? Of who is actually doing what they say they're doing. And, so I think the idea that, hey, can we hide a little longer for the DoD contractors? Can we maybe kind of squeeze this a little bit, TBD, but, it's going to keep kind of moving forward. And, we'll get into this in a little bit about consequences or implications, right, on DoD contractors, but not having a certain security posture related to COI and FCI is not going to be an acceptable, excuse anymore, right, going forward. So really understanding that this is going to be more cemented and now need to be a requirement going forward, I think is the key takeaway for me here too.
Yeah, for sure.
So we talked about kind of the evolution, right, of CMMC, obviously 2.0. You've talked about the different maturity levels, ML1, ML2, right, obviously different practices. Maybe, kind of walk us through a little bit here, Brian, kind of what are these practices, these maturity levels, kind of what is, at a high level, of course, sort of what does this look like as we know it right now? Kind of what do folks on the line here need to be thinking about or aware of related to level 1 and level 2 at least?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So level one, as you can see, I love the graphic here. It's essentially Lego blocks, right? Effectively, these practices or the different levels of the maturity levels or MLs, right? The maturity levels are meant to be sort of stacked on top of each other, iterative, right? So they build. And so, like I said before, maturity level one is not a very heavy lift, but it's like for most organizations that have good cyber hygiene, all right, and have good practice, so good basic, not hygiene. Hygiene comes in level two, but have basic cybersecurity practices and controls and ways that they do it, right? They don't have a defined security practice, but at least you're doing the basics, right? That's where that comes in. 17 controls, what they call practices in the CMMC space. And that is primarily to safeguard this federal contract information. And to be clear, these are the actual contracts, whether in paper format or whether in digital format, that have been received through either from and I think it's actually helpful to maybe explain the prime and sub relationship, right? We didn't talk about that. And so you have an organization that is a direct customer where the DoD is a direct customer. That's what's called a prime contractor. So if you're selling to the DoD and you have direct contractual relationship with them, you're what's called a prime because you're the first level, prime one, right? Think of it that way. And anybody that's the first level, anybody downstream is what's called a subcontractor. So it's important to understand what that is, right? So you have these subcontractors, first level, second level, third level. It can go really deep. And you can have prime contractors have thousands of subs. I mean, it goes massive. Think of like the big guys, right? The Lockheeds, the Northrop Grummons, the General Dynamics that build massive weapons programs, for example. They have huge amounts of supply chains, right? And so what has to happen here if you have a direct relationship? And let's just say you're selling, I don't know, you're selling some sort of a basic product. Maybe you don't even manufacture it, you resell it. You just have to protect the contracts. That's maturity level one. Now, that's 17 controls. Stack on top of it the next Lego brick from our friends in Denmark, right, who made Legos, right? So stack the next Lego brick, it gets much more complicated. Again, you can't just look at that as being a small Lego brick. It is 5 or 6 fold more complicated. Is now you have to really prove that you have, as Andrew said before, you have a security program in place to safeguard that CUI, that controlled unclassified information. And that is based on NIST 800-171, revision 2, not 3, right? Just to be clear. And that, for some organizations, requires an assessment by a third party. We talked about R2D2's friend earlier, right? The C3 PAO, Certified Third Party Assessor. Depending on the type of information you hold, the type of CUI, chances are very likely, far, far more likely than not, that you must be certified by a third party and get a certification. Okay. And that is really not optional anymore. You have to prove that. Because remember how all these different defense contractors weren't doing their crap? They weren't doing it. Well, now you got to prove it, right? Did you actually do it? We won't get too far into the risks of like, FCA, false claims and all that. We'll talk about that another time, but that's a relevant piece. And then level three is still being fully fleshed out based on this 800-172, but that's not fully done yet. But that only applies to like maybe, some a very small percentage of prime contractors that are very sensitive. Most defense contractors won't fall under level three. And by the way, level three can only be assessed by the DIBCAC itself, right? So by the DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, they have a whole team who would do level three assessments, not done by a private auditor.
Exactly. And I think there's a couple takeaways here, right? That, we'll again get back into acronym soup right here on this, but, looking at this, getting back to kind of what we talked about towards the beginning of the presentation here about contracts and understanding the contract type and the information that your customers, right, for the MSP folks here on the line, your customers may be holding. So is it federal contract information, right? Are they really kind of doing, or are they, kind of leveraging or holding CUI, controlled unclassified information? And so not everybody, right, is going to need to fall into, in terms of security program, the posture, et cetera, a maturity level two. And so I think that can, in fact, by a little bit of maybe I heard a little bit of a sigh in the room for those who are concerned about this. I've heard
A
a lot
sigh
of
of
people,
relief. Oh my God.
yeah, it has to be
Not
level
me.
two. Yeah, I see that, yelled
Right.
about across, LinkedIn and social media and all those, but, being mindful that it really gets down to the heart of the data and the contracts and what your customer does. So being able to assess that and then kind of, evaluate what you then, possibly need to be providing or they need to have, right, as a security program or capabilities to achieve that required level of
And
security.
Andrew, just again to put a finer point on, it, you already said it, but I want to make sure I say it. It is critical that your customer, and maybe you help them with this, is that they go through their contracts and identify what the contract states. And you're looking for certain key phrases. If you just do a control F through a PDF document looking for 7012, that's one that pops up pretty easily if you search for that, just 7012, right? If that clause is in there and it pops up, you must be ML2. You are ML2. Full stop. Even before CMMC gets baked into contracts because it already existed years ago. Okay. And they're already having to comply with that, and they probably are not. I hope they are, but they probably aren't.
No, but that's a great tip for folks as well, right? To, that quick control F, kind of working with your clients or reviewing
Yeah.
what you're doing. That's a great.
And have an honest conversation with them too, right? Be very open with them about that and say, look, we're just learning about this. Here are the risks involved. We need to be very open and honest with one another as far as what your requirements are and what our part of that is too.
100%, 100%. So kind of that's a good segue, I think, into impact on the DoD contractors, right? Those orgs, right? Whether it's the prime, the subs, however many, however deep it goes, really, as we talked about, it's that security program, protect the information. And so whether that's, enhance security requirements to reduce risk of data breaches, I'll also highlight, the word risk here, right? Risk management is different than cybersecurity controls. And so be mindful of, hey, that's a different process. It's developing, right, and supporting the assessment of, asset and information criticality, the threats related there, what the countermeasures and capabilities you have to offset that, and kind of what you're doing continuously, right? It's never one point in time. But these DoD contractors are going to be expected to assessing risk as well. And so I just, kind of noticed we talk about controls, RMF, CSF, et cetera. I think it's just important real quick as well to highlight the difference between risk management frameworks and controls frameworks, and that those are in fact two separate things because they're two separate processes, but they are tied together as part of that security program. Okay.
Sure.
Compliance is a prerequisite, right? So these DoD contractors we talk about, it's a mandatory thing. They can't just choose, and there are implications as well if they aren't compliant, right? So whether that's auditors coming in with a long list of POAMs, right? So those are findings of different levels that are going to be required to be buttoned up by a certain period of time. But kind of, I'm not going to read through the whole list here. Obviously, people can view it. But I think Brian, in your opinion, right, kind of in what you've seen in kind of what you're finding, what is it that DoD contractors are expected to uphold, beyond kind of what we're looking at here, or what is that sort of process? Look like that they need to start to, kind of what is it they're going to have to start thinking about implementing related to what's here on the slide.
Well, first of all, you said a minute ago, right? So compliance is a prerequisite. So compliance, first of all, building this program, right? And it's not like Andrew said, it's not just risk management because that's a piece of this, but it's also making sure that you adhere to the foundational components and aspects that are outlined in the law, right? It's a regulation.
Brian, did I lose you? Zach, are you there? Something frozen on mine. Not sure if we lost Brian.
I am here. He does appear to have frozen.
Cool. It was that impactful that we lost him for a moment. Um, he'll be back. But yeah, kind of continuing it. That these things really must be met, folks, right? So that compliance with those controls, I think, is incredibly important. Okay. Oh, here we go. Here's Brian. You're back.
I am back. These are
Outs-
the perils of working from home, right? But what do? We adapt and we twist and turn, right? So I'll kind of just go back to that piece where I was there. So lost internet for like 20 seconds. Sorry about that. This is why it's beneficial to have a backup circuit, right? There's a
Right.
case to be made here. All right. So like I was saying, it's a requirement, right? So they have to follow this process and they have to engage in all the components required and they have to attest to that. And it's not possible for them to stay non-compliant. And part of the conversations we have with them, and frankly, I think you should too, is say, look, how much of your business comes from the DoD? And do you want to do this? We'll talk about the kind of costs involved and what the requirements are later and how that could impact you as an MSP and them cost-wise. But part of the conversation should be, does it make sense to continue working with the DoD? Because the lift is quite heavy, especially if they've done nothing so far.
Absolutely. What happens if they don't do it? Right. I guess,
Oh boy.
highlighted it, but I
Yeah.
think
You
what
ready?
we highlighted Georgia Tech, right, and the
Yeah.
FCA. And for those who
Yeah.
are unaware of the FCA is, that's the False Claims Act. So this is the Department of Justice. A couple of years ago, announced that it will actually pursue organizations who are knowingly providing a subpar security program on federal contracts. They will pursue them for fraud using the False Claims Act. And unfortunately, Georgia Tech recently, it came out that they were knowingly not being truthful in their disclosures and reporting of its cybersecurity and risk management program in support of
Mhm.
their contract. So, this is a significant example of now the DOJ and DoD going after, right, those contractors. But, Brian, kind of what are those implications of non-compliance? I guess what is it that will, the consequences there that could happen to programs who are not adhering to this?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you do not want to invoke the ire of the DoD, right? If the Defense Contract Audit Agency, the DCAA, comes after you and they start, or let's say there's a whistleblower complaint, right? Somebody, an employee or maybe an MSP, blows the whistle to the DoD and then they pass it on and refer that case to the DOJ. The DOJ is very interested in making examples, especially early days, because it's initiatives federally, right, across the entire federal government on cybersecurity is a big deal. And there's a lot of appetite to make sure that we're really shoring up our defenses, right? And protecting our data. Because for a long time, nation states, adversaries have been eating our lunch and stealing information from us, just going right into our networks, grabbing it right out. The DoD recognized that, right? The federal government recognized that. So this is why this is all being enforced now. So around the False Claims Act, what can happen if you are the unwitting and sad recipient of a False Claims Act lawsuit by the DoD? This is a civil suit, rarely has criminal implications, but it's a civil lawsuit. And if you're found to be guilty and in violation of the False Claims Act, you can be hit with what are called treble damages. Treble is just a fancy word for three. In other words, all of the contracts you were supposed to be in compliance with, let's say over the last 5 to 10 years, that included DFAR 7012, that you won all that business, say it was $10 million in business over that time, you now have to repay $30 million, right? That's not insignificant. In extreme cases, there could be, it's very rare, criminal charges, but it's generally more addressed as a civil complaint by the DOJ.
Yeah, yeah. And so, kind of, I guess we'll switch to I think what folks are, kind of here for, what's this mean for MSPs, right, on the next slide. But, kind of again, right, we've been hammering home the importance of a security program, the process, what needs to be put in place, continually assessed and proven, right, that the job was done. Really also holding the end user organization from an MSP perspective accountable in working with you to implement a program, right? Saying, I don't have the money to do it isn't a good answer, not necessarily for you, but for the partner, right? For your end user organization. And so you are partly there to help deliver that program, depending on what your services are, but really making sure that accountability angle is there, to also make sure that you're helping them maintain that compliance. So, as I mentioned, right, let's get to maybe what everyone is probably here to understand. What does this mean for me? What is it that we need to be doing? Kind of, this is a great summary, but, kind of how does the CMMC and kind of the delivering to the DIB, how is this going to impact, MSPs, right? So, kind of talk to us about, kind of your perspective on specifically the MSP community, what this means, for them.
Sure. And I think that's why a lot of you may be here today, right? Is to understand what the impact is on you, what you have to do, right? Not just your customer, but how you serve your customer, your client. Again, your customer being that defense contractor. So as it says your first bullet, right? MSPs are not excluded from scrutiny, and that's a very broad statement. But here's what you have to understand. And this is now, again, essentially enshrined in law, is that if your customer must be maturity level 1 compliant, so must you as well as the MSP. And that may be striking some of you by surprise. Some of you have never heard this before. You may feel it's unfair. That sucks. I don't disagree with you. It seems onerous and overbearing. However, if you think about why that is, it may make more sense. Okay, so let's dig into the why for a second. The reason that is because the customer controls process, holds processes, creates, transmits controlled unclassified information. But think about this. You yourself as the MSP, you have God rights, you have admin access, you have essentially full control over their systems and access to their data. You're effectively, if you will, a supply chain attack vector, right? Or essentially a vector of attack through which anybody could come. So why would that make you as an MSP exempt from what they have to do? Because essentially, you also then have access to all your other clients. Let's say all your other clients are defense contractors. If it's 1 or 10 or 100, it doesn't matter. If you have one defense contractor who has to be maturity level 2 certified, oh, I think we just may have lost Andrew. Zach, are you still there?
I am. So continue on.
Okay, I'll
back.
continue on. All right, no problem. But just because we lost our slides as well, which is fine, no problem. I'm not reading from the slides. But ultimately, what you have to understand is that if the customer has to become maturity level 2 certified, then you as an MSP do as well. And that creates a lot of challenges, right? It brings with it a lot of questions, a lot of like, what do I do? Do I even want to be in this business, right? So there's more questions than answers, typically, at least initially. But this is where the education comes in. We're going to dig more into that and what that looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Hopefully Andrew comes back because I don't see the slide bullets. You know what? I have the slideshow on my side here. I can probably open it up real quick, so bear with me. Going to jump through this real quick on my end here just to make sure I have the bullets that are on the slide itself. So, yeah, so just be aware you're not excluded from scrutiny. That means you yourself have to level up. If you want to serve a DoD contractor, particularly that holds COI and has to be maturity level 2, so must you. Okay? All right. And so you've got to make sure you understand that navigating these issues, right, these CMMC requirements, compliance requirements, are done in such a way that allows you to not, again, sort of invoke attention or garner attention from the wrong people, right? Effectively, you want to keep your nose clean in this. And so you have it sort of, there's an inflection point, sort of a decision you'll need to make, because the process of becoming maturity level 2 certified, and then there's another component which has to do with dealing with your tooling, that creates a lot of challenges for the standard MSP, because you may have 1 or 2 defense clients. Maybe it's a manufacturing client. Maybe they're in biotech and they deal with the DoD, right? But maybe most of your customers are not. You're going to have to make some decisions on whether you still want to serve that community, right? Those defense customers, because it may not make sense to do that. And again, there's a lot of soul searching you have to do around this and decide whether it's, should we stay in this? Bear with me here because I know we lost our slides. And so as Andrew said earlier, you have to have a detailed security program that is being implemented, outlined, followed, and clearly communicated to all parties involved, right? And so you're following these policies, creating processes, consistently identifying what that risk looks like and how to implement these solutions and making sure that COI is safeguarded. Again, with maturity level 1, with FCI, protecting federal contract information, that's again a fairly low lift. It's not insignificant, but it's lower. We're talking more about those that are maturity level 2. That's really where the rubber meets the road here. Then you have to also keep in mind that you have to commit significant time and resources to, first of all, get there to level up your own MSP, making yourself compliant. Working with a firm, whether it's us or someone else, that helps you get there and identify, all right, even the beginning. I will sometimes even talk MSPs out of like, do you really want to pursue this? You can, but you have to know what's involved. You need to know what the requirements are. And then, like the slides here, just looking at the bullet, the opportunities versus the gotchas. What are the opportunities that you can have out of this? And I want to make sure I pause there for a second. The opportunities are actually huge. If you are an MSP that says, you know what, I see this being an underserved market, the lift to get there is fairly heavy. It requires a lot of time, treasure, and talent to get there. However, the opportunity and what the addressable market is on the back end of that is significant. Okay. It's a significant market who are going to be underserved and are going to be scrambling. They're going to be scrambling for for MSPs that are certified who can actually serve them. Because think about this, 99% of MSPs will not be allowed to serve them anymore. So what do? They'll have to work with somebody who is certified. So I like to always outline the opportunity first, right? So for those who have kind of the intestinal fortitude to move forward with a program like this, certify themselves in MSP, you will undoubtedly, especially being an early adopter, be able to achieve quite a few, let's call it riches, and being able to not only serve your clients better, but take on other defense contractor customers whose MSPs is no longer qualified to serve them. So I know Andrew's back, so I'll pause here, but I think we hit all the bullets on this slide.
Awesome. Yeah, and apologies, folks. I'm having internet issues as well. So
Happened to you too.
it's a Thursday, whatever that means. So it happened to me too. So yeah, I appreciate you summarizing all that. For the folks here on the line, Brian. I figure, why don't we open it up for questions? Kind of hear what the attendees are thinking of, kind of what prompted some folks kind of thoughts in mind, things of that nature. So Zach, do we have any questions here in the chat?
I think there's one from Brad that would be good to answer. It is, does the MSP have to be certified or just compliant?
So the shorter answer is, as the rule is written right now, the MSP itself must be certified as well. Now, we don't expect that to change because at this point, we see the rule as it's written to be final and that's called Title 32 CFR 32, to be finalized in, again, right now it's expected to be December. And so the way the rule is written is that the MSP itself must also be certified by a C3PAO at the same level, again, right? So it's not just functional compliance, it's certified compliance. We can make the argument, I think it's fair to say, and some of you may say, that's not what I heard, right? But you can make the argument saying that, I'm functionally compliant, I'm good to go. But if you have to be at the same level as what's called an external service provider, an ESP, that's just a fancy term they use for MSP, right? You yourself are effectively, because you are processing, you have access to the CUI and you have access to log information, configuration information. All of that makes you, by definition, an external service provider. As such, you're essentially a covered entity in scope, and therefore must also be certified. Some people, again, may argue that, but that's how I interpret the regulation.
Awesome. Zach, I'm looking in the Q&A here. We got one from David Lewis. And so, Brian, this is a good question. For a 2 to 3 man MSP, what's the rough estimate as to costs and how many labor hours to attain CMMC level 2?
Oh boy, it's an awesome question, Dave, but there's no great answer. But I'll give you sort of a ballpark what we have heard and seen. Just to be very clear, we have ourselves not gotten ourselves to certification yet because, first of all, nobody can be certified yet, right? Because the final rule, the rule's not finalized yet. Once that's done, that's when these certifications start happening. Currently, only the DIBCAC through the DoD is doing that. But that being said, ballpark, very, very high level. And just to be very clear, the size of your MSP is not going to be the primary driver, right, around what the cost is. It's the efforts to implement the program and the lift around changing your tooling and then making sure you're maintaining that. But I would say it's reasonable to say at least 50,000, maybe as high as 150. And I know that's a really big range. And I'm sorry that it's so high or that's so broad, but that's what I think you can expect to pay in order to get yourself there. Now, it's a vast estimate. It also, by the way, depends on what the C3PAO is charging you on the back end to actually be able to be certified yourself, because a lot of the work you could do yourself as far as like implementing controls and that the customer themselves can't do. You would do on their behalf. But if you're leveling up yourself, I think that's a fair 50 to 100, maybe as high as 150, in order to get there. Now, if you're doing everything yourself and you're doing all the compliance work, you read through the regulation, you have a GRC platform, you understand how to do all that, and you don't need to hire a compliance organization such as us, for example, right? Then that number would come down. But again, I have to ballpark.
Cool. Yeah, great answer. Here's another question, and I'm seeing, so folks, I'm also seeing a lot of questions about Todyl, right, and so forth like that. We're documenting that. More will come, right, in the next set of series webinars, kind of about Todyl and kind of where we fit. I think what we're focusing on here is just some of the higher level points. So we are writing those down. Obviously, those who tracking those questions, but if there are any questions about Todyl specifically or something like that, we'll answer those either offline. You can reach out to myself here, or if you have a account manager here at Todyl, we can support that. But we're going to focus a little bit more on generic, kind of MSP. What does this mean?
Yeah, the basics essentially. That's what today was meant to be, basics for CMMC, right?
100%.
We're going to have more, like Andrew said, in the series. We're going to do at least 2, maybe 3 more, depending on what the appetite is, about diving deeper.
Yeah. Here's another good one, right? So after the final rule is released in October, what is the no later than for compliance or certification? Will they have till the end of 2025? Is it going to happen sooner? Kind of, what are you seeing, Brian?
Yeah, awesome question. Okay, the term, we're reading the tea leaves. That's what we're talking about, right? We're reading the tea leaves here. And reading the tea leaves, what it comes down to is you have to understand that the program itself, once CMMC is live, remember, CMMC is the enforcement and saying you did what you said you had to do, okay? If you already have DFAR 7012 clauses in your contract, or your clients do, they are already past due and already out of compliance, to be clear. Now, I'm talking about the customer itself. I'm not talking about you as the MSP, okay? Is that a fair, should I answer on that through that lens?
Yeah,
Andrew, through the lens of the
think
MSP?
so. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it as maybe the customer first, but then kind of the MSP as well, trying to satisfy it if you can.
Sure. So if they already have DFARS requirements, they're already, and have not done anything, they're already out of compliance, and they technically could get a False Claims Act charge by the DOJ. That could happen today, literally, right? Somebody could contact the DOJ and be a whistleblower. And by the way, just so you know, there'll be some people out there that'll be opportunistic, that are going to look to blow the whistle on a defense contractor that has been really, let's say, egregious. And Georgia Tech was one of those, by the way. That case, now we're talking about billions of dollars in R&D funding they've gotten from the federal government. But I don't want to stop there. And the whistleblower, by the way, if the DOJ is successful and wins that, the whistleblower gets 20% of the award. So there's a lot of incentive for people to blow the whistle and their whistleblower protections. That said, back to the actual question. And so that is, how long will it take? Well, or how long do we need or do we have to become compliant? And again, we're reading the tea leaves here. It all depends on when the rule becomes final. But once the rule is final, that's Title 32. And once Title 48, which is the inclusion in contracts, which has to be that's a congressional vote, probably the next Congress after January 3rd. Once that's implemented, then what happens is that at that point, it depends on when let's assume that DFARS clauses have not been included. DFAR 7012 clauses were not in a previous contract. Now what they're doing is they're rolling this out, the CMMC program, over 3 years, right? And we really care about the level 2, maturity level 2 folks. That's what we really care about, because that's really where kind of the meat and potatoes are, right? That's where the risk, but also the opportunity is as well. So I say it's reasonable for someone who's done nothing or needs to get to maturity level 2. It's going to take 12 months, maybe 18, and 12 months if you're really hustling to get there. And as an MSP, I've heard that there have been folks out there who really are leveling with the customer, saying, hey guys, we love you. We love working with you. We worked together for years. You need to do this now, and we're going to do this together. And you do that with them in concert. And there may be ways to share some of the expense, potentially with an assessment organization, or sort of a compliance organization, but also then with the final certification. I've heard about that. There are some certifiers who are willing to do that, who are willing to sort of help them like, okay, we'll do one certification, but we'll give you 2 certificates, right? One assessment, 2 certificates. So that could happen too.
Yeah.
Not a great answer, but again, we have to read the tea leaves.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot to still, wait for, but I think, the
Lots
bottom
of
line
variables.
is it's good to get started, again, right? I think this has been hot and heavy the last, kind of 12 months, especially. I haven't seen it popping up more, but really starting to get those questions and discussions going now at the very latest if you haven't.
But
And so
start with the contract review. Start there. Help your clients understand if they fall under this. Start there. If you want to get us involved, get us involved. We'll have that conversation too.
Yeah. So kind of on that same point, right? So there's a question from Todd. What are your thoughts on segmenting a part of the organization to the DoD work versus the whole company? So kind of assuming this is about the MSP, maybe creating sort of a subsidiary or a child, or a sister company, so to speak, that handles CMMC versus not. Is that an avenue that could be done, Brian? I mean, again, timing, costs, but what are your thoughts there?
It certainly is an avenue. I mean, obviously you can do that. You can, if you will, enclave your business or at least sort of splinter it off into a separate division that only does CMMC related work. The question I would ask is that effective? Is that efficient, right? Does that make sense to do that? And I don't really know the answer. Like any attorney will tell you, the answer is it depends, right? It depends on a lot of different variables. Could that be done? Yes. But if you're talking about sort of like, if you're talking about it from a customer perspective, Todd, I think the person asking is Todd. If you're asking from a customer perspective, who is, what they're going to do and how they're going to kind of safeguard that CUI. Yeah, there's terminologies like there's a term that's used called enclave, which is essentially enclaving that CUI into a separate space. Microsoft 365 GCC High is one of the ways of doing that, right? So that could be, the cost could be reduced to make that happen because anything that's a CUI or any system, information system, or what's called a security protection asset, SPA, is considered in scope. Anything that holds, processes, stores, or transmits, CUI. So again, a lot of it depends. There's a lot of moving parts. Not a great answer, I know, but it's because you can't give a definitive answer around this, at least not yet, because there's not a lot of use cases yet, right? Or case studies.
Yeah. We got a couple questions to work through here. So Christian's asking, come from a HIPAA background, which required annual assessment and training and testing. Is there an ongoing testing requirement, and assuming training testing is similar, for MSP employees in addition to the triannual assessment? Now, given triannual, Christian, I'm going to assume that you maybe identify there's maybe maturity level 2 there, right? But Brian, what are MSPs looking at from a testing and training and kind of employee knowledge maintenance perspective with this?
So as of right now, as far as I'm aware, because I don't know everything, right? I want to be very clear about that. I'm not the oracle. I don't know what's going to happen. I imagine that the cyber AB and what's called the CAICO that helps certify assessors and instructors, for example, will probably create guidance around what MSPs, or in this case, what they call ESPs, should know in order to better facilitate the compliance for their customers around safeguarding that CUI. That's what it's all about at the end, by creating that program that can be managed. My presumption is that's still, because it's early days, will still be created as time goes on. Is there currently an official certification process for an MSP tech? No, absolutely not. But it's not a bad idea to at least yourself, if you're operationally involved in your business, is looking at the regulation, reading the rule, right? Title 32 CFR, reading that, understanding what it says. Because most of it's in there. Yeah, it's kind of a legal speak, right? Regulation. But it'll become clear what's required to stay on top of it. Now, first of all, it's important to also understand that if you have high level sensitivity of high level CUI, CUI, and what we generally call CUI, for example, international trade and arms regulation called ITAR, that cannot be accessed or viewed by any non-American. So it has to be a U.S. It cannot be a foreign national. So if you're offshoring of your operation, you've got to keep in mind that that's a variable you have to consider about whether that's still going to work for you if you serve that community, right? You have to really think this through and make decisions around, do I still want to serve that community? This goes deeper, and this is going to probably be part of another one in the series around CMMC, but I'll kind of stop there for now.
Yeah, no, great answers though, Brian. I think, yeah, again, a lot of it is understanding the the desire and resource requirements that you as an MSP want to serve, right? Kind of the DIB, right, and the DoD, and kind of what that will require. But more to come, right, in the series, as Brian said. We got some more to dive into here, obviously, because it's a big topic. I think we got one more question here. Time for one more question. So Clint's asking you, Brian. So his interpretation is that the MSP as an ESP will need to be CMMC certified by a 3PA prior to the DIB clients being able to be certified. Is that how you see the order of operations playing out as well?
So that's open to interpretation again, but as the rule is written right now, I believe you got certified. Should you be certified before them? I guess in theory, that would make sense because you're ready before they are as your customer. But I can't speak to that explicitly, right? Because the regulation around that is if you want to serve your customer, they're not giving timing. You need to be certified before them. It's more about you yourself must also be kind of, call it like co-certified effectively. So there's no clear answer around that, but let's just go with as long as you're on that journey together and you're intending to do that and you're going to get certified, whether it's before them or around the same time, just know that once you want, at least at the time when the regulators come in or someone's coming in to audit you from the DoD or audit your customer, is that, again, you can keep your nose clean. It's not a great answer, I know, but there's so many moving parts here and there's still determination on what's actually going to happen and come to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we are at the end of our time. Obviously, a lot of good discussion, a lot of great questions. I'm sure folks still have quite a bit on their minds. But as Brian has said, right, this is a series. So we're going to be, doing a couple more of these in the near future, diving into maybe more technical components of it, other aspects of CMMC. And those requirements. So I would say, if you have any remaining questions or so forth, if you'd like to send them along to, you see our contact info, there's my email there, as well as Brian, and can also, Brian and Exceed, help with this, and kind of understanding where do organizations need to go. So this is sort of their specialty. But, we'll go ahead and close this down. This recording will be available to those who registered. So we'll be working on that, but really appreciate everyone's time today. Apologies for the internet snafus. It's the world of work from home in office and doing this nationally. But again, really appreciate everyone's attendance and time today. And we'll see you all on the next series that we have.
Thanks for being here, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time.